After yesterday's dramatic news on the battlefields, there's been less news today, which is unsurprising. I generally find that over the weekends, unless there's been some sort of dramatic breakthrough, the news flow from the battlefields ebbs. However, it's clear that fighting does continue. Yesterday, as I think I reported in my previous video, late in the afternoon, just as I was doing my video in fact, a report came through that another important settlement between Soledar and Siversk had been captured by the forces of the Wagner organization, so that the Ukrainian forces that are still defending Siversk, that are still fighting there, that have received no instructions so far to retreat, despite alleged demands from Zelensky, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, President Zelensky, that they should be ordered to retreat because the alternative would be that they would become encircled. Well, that encirclement of those troops seems to be approaching, and there is no sign, as I said, that the Ukrainian government, that the Ukrainian authorities are in any way considering the withdrawal of those troops.
If they just let us help them.
I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to learn. Unlike some people.
Didn't think endless fun would be so fucking cool.
Siversk. So that is what seems to be going on in that part of the battlefield. We're getting closer to a situation where a Ukrainian force, perhaps not a very large one, but certainly a force that's located in Siversk, is coming closer to the point of encirclement. And there's now film and photographic evidence from Julianna. This is a town to the west of Bakhmut that sits astride the last remaining open road, well, semi-open road into Bakhmut from the west. and it's clear that one can hear the sound of small arms fire in the background, which all but confirms that the fighting has reached at least the outskirts of Ivanovka, even if it hasn't yet reached the actual center of the settlement itself. By the way, as I think I may have mentioned previously, the settlement that the Ukrainians refer to as Ivanovka, the Russians call Krasnoye, and it's quite plausible that before long we will learn that we will start to see reports about a place called Krasnoye in Russian reports and Ivanovka in the Ukrainian reports, and in fact they are one and the same place. Now, elsewhere, other things are also happening. It's not just in the Solidar, Bakhmut front that there are important events. Firstly, there's been more news of some sort of Russian advance in the general area of Marinka. Apparently fighting there is very intense. It's not clear how many forces are deployed on either side, but certainly the Russian forces seem to be creeping slowly, incrementally towards Avdiivka. I'm going to make a guess, by the way, that once the military situation in Bakhmut and the areas around it is resolved, before the Russians launch some sort of advance on Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, there is a likelihood that they will work to try to break through the Ukrainian lines around Donetsk city. This is my own guess. I may be wrong, but anyway, we shall see. And about that Russian offensive in Zaporozhye, we've got less news this morning. The reports suggest that the Russians are still advancing, but at a slower tempo from what they were yesterday. And this and other reports tend to reinforce my own belief that this is not the major offensive that some people have been talking about, but, as I suggested yesterday, more a diversionary exercise intended to compel the Ukrainians to transfer troops from other battlefronts and to deploy reserves, which they might otherwise be building up to repel Russian advances or to launch offensives in future.
Already
I'll
got
come to
full
that
ammo.
later in this program. Anyway, to transfer these sort of forces to Zaporozhye to plug the gaps there. And if that's the case, if that is the Russian plan, then we're getting some reason to think that it's already proving successful. There was a report earlier today that the Ukrainians have actually diverted some troops from Kramatorsk, that's to say in the Donbass area, the area that was formerly last line of defense in Donbass once Bakhmut and its environs fall to the Russians, that the Ukrainians had to rush troops from Kramatorsk to hold positions in Zaporozhye. But having said that, there is still a lot of fighting going on at Zaporozhye. It does seem that the Russians are still advancing there. We just have to wait and see before we know for certain what. Exactly is going to happen. And there are some reports that the Russians are working to take the important town of Orechov into some kind of pincer strike, and then to sort of encircle it. And of course, as I said yesterday, if the Russians do capture Orechov or make an attempt to capture Orechov, then we can come back to this and perhaps revisit our thinking, and it would indeed in that case look like a more serious offensive than perhaps the kind of diversionary operation, which I suspect it is at the moment. But anyway, there's also reports further north in the Svatovo-Kremenaya front, and a Russian official has come out and said that there are reports, indications of a large deployment of Ukrainian forces in Kupiansk, and the official in question is Andrei Marochko, who is a retired colonel of the Lugansk People's Republic, but he's also somebody who's connected with the authorities of the Lugansk People's Republic. He told TASS that a large number of armoured vehicles for Ukrainian units are being moved into areas near Kupiansk. Residents of Kharkiv reported seeing 2 trains carrying armoured vehicles to Kupiansk. Western-made armour has been unloaded at a sorting station and is being sent towards Svatovo. And the internet, the Russian and Ukrainian Telegram channels are buzzing with theories that this armoured deployment is to support some kind of further attempted Ukrainian offensive towards Svatovo, or perhaps Kupiansk, towards Kupiansk or Kremenaya. There have been multiple Ukrainian attacks in this area. None of them have been successful up to this point, but we shall see. And I ought to say that as I'm making this video, there's been a report on another Russian Telegram channel, which is claiming that Russian artillery is now shelling Ukrainian positions in and around Orekhov on the Zaporozhye front, which would suggest that the Russians are making significant progress again on the Zaporozhye front and are closing in on Orekhov, which, as I said, would be the clearest sign that this is a major offensive and not just a diversionary exercise. Anyway, going back to what's going on in the Svatovo-Kremenaya area, it is indeed possible that the Ukrainians are planning some sort of counterattack there, but again, I have to say that it's also possible, given previous Russian advances in this area, that the Ukrainians are rushing forces now to reinforce their positions in the Svatovo-Kremenaya area, because other troops, Ukrainian troops who were previously located in this area, have been transferred south to the defense of Bakhmut. Now, I'm going to come to all of that shortly, but I will say that there's also been a flood of reports over the last couple of days, about a week, showing that Ukraine is once more undertaking a major mobilization exercise. There's pictures, I've seen pictures of men of various ages, some quite old, being rounded on the streets of Ukrainian cities. About a week ago, some kind of operation like that took place in Lvov, in western Ukraine, and there's been a lot of speculations about what this means. I don't think it's actually particularly difficult to guess what this means. Firstly, Ukraine does need to replenish the losses that it has suffered over the course of September. There were those 2 Ukrainian offensives in Kherson region, which caused Ukraine to suffer severe losses, and above all, and beyond that, there's been this massive loss of men and machines in Bakhmut and in the battles that are taking place there. So Ukraine needs to plug the gaps in its army by raising more troops, by mobilizing more troops. The Ukrainians are also talking about creating 3 new brigades equipped with the new Western armoured vehicles, the Bradleys, the Strykers, the Marders, that we've been hearing so much about over the last few days, and possibly put the Western tanks, the Leopard 2 tanks, and perhaps the Challenger 2 tanks, and the French wheeled tanks once these all arrive. So they need to find men to fill the gaps and to try to create these new brigades. I would say that creating these new brigades, putting aside all the enormous logistical problems that I've discussed previously, and which Brian Beletic at the New Atlas has discussed also, and much more authoritatively than I can do. That's going to be a major undertaking. If it's done properly, it will need months. One wonders whether, in fact, it will be done properly. But if there is indeed a intention to create 3 new brigades from the bottom upwards and integrate them with armored vehicles of a sort that Ukraine has never operated up to this time, well, those 3 brigades, if they're to operate effectively on the battlefields, are not going to do so until, I would guess, the midsummer at the earliest. Of course, they could be patched together, thrown into battle sooner than that, but if so, I would guess that they would suffer very quickly, very heavy losses, and would probably be knocked out of fight fairly soon. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that, but there is one other point, which is that we are once again, and we've done at previous stages of the war, seeing all sorts of elderly men in their 60s sometimes, sometimes also teenagers, turning up on the battlefields, the front lines in Ukraine. Now, way back in the summer months, at the time of the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk battles, I remember seeing something similar, and I remember being very shocked by it. And I remember saying to myself, well, this suggests that Ukraine must be running short of men. Others pointed out that what was actually happening was that the Ukrainians were sending old men to hold the front lines and quite often died doing so, whilst the younger and fitter men were held back and were trained up to form new brigades, which were then in fact thrown into battle in Kharkov and Kherson. Well, I think on balance it was the people who were saying the second who were telling the truth. I don't think it was entirely and exclusively that way. I'm not sure that it was quite planned in exactly that kind of fashion. But certainly Ukraine does seem to have held back much of its best or its most active, manpower to try to rebuild new formations in the summer, as opposed to the less high quality manpower. It uses extremely cynical language to use about human lives, but there it is. I suppose this is the calculus of war. That Ukrainians were using.
How far can this topsy-turvy misadventure
for the
go?
reason that was being said,
Where's
in
the
order to
limit?
buy time. Well, I wonder to what extent it's appropriate and proper to do that sort of thing. And I would say also that whilst Ukraine could absorb the loss of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk last summer, the loss of Bakhmut and of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, if it does indeed follow, and of Avdiivka, would be a much more severe body blow this time. Anyway, to move on, we have now had a very interesting article from Reuters, and Reuters, I should say, takes what I would call very much the standard British line on the war. It tends to take not just a strongly pro-Ukrainian line, but one which seeks to spin all battlefield events very much to give the impression that things are going well for Ukraine. But this article is about US intentions. And it says that US officials are advising Ukraine to wait on the offensive. And we're told that an official, a senior US officials, are advising Ukraine to hold off on launching a major offensive against the Russian forces until the latest supply of US weaponry is in place and training has been provided, the senior Biden administration official said on Friday.
What?
The official, speaking to a small group of reporters on condition of anonymity, said the United States was holding fast to its decision not to provide Abrams tanks to Ukraine at this time, amid a controversy with Germany over tanks. So the United States does not intend to supply tanks to Ukraine. I don't think that's going to change, by the way. I think that's one thing that the United States has almost certainly categorically put down. I think the uniform military is extremely bad idea for many reasons. And though I would not be surprised to see other US weapon systems like ATACMS missiles, for example, turning up, I think that for the moment, and indeed probably for the future, the United States will not supply its own tanks to Ukraine. Anyway, putting that aside, we are told that the United States is now in deep consultations with Ukraine about the next move, but it is emphasizing to Ukraine that it must first devote enough time first to training on the latest weaponry provided by the United States. And the Reuters article then goes on to say US officials believe an offensive would stand to be more successful should the Ukrainians take advantage of the training and the significant infusion of weaponry. And then we come to the most interesting and, in my opinion, by far the most revealing part of this Reuters article. Because the